Hello, welcome to our ValEUs Podcast series. My name is David Orlov from Nazabayev University in Astana, Kazakhstan. This podcast is a part of the ValEUs project, the Jean Monnet Policy Network titled ValEUs Research and Education Network on Contestation to EU Foreign Policy. It's founded from the Erasmus Plus program of the European Commission for a 3-year period starting from January 2024. This ambitious project, involving 20 partner institutions from 17 countries across 5 continents, focuses on scrutinizing the foreign policy of the European Union and the challenges posed to its values. Today with us is Jean-François Caron, an associate professor at Nazabayev University and currently a visiting professor at the American University of Armenia in Yerevan. I personally have known Professor Caron for more than a decade now, as during your first year at Nazabayev University in 2016, I took your class on multiculturalism, and since then I had the pleasure to take your other numerous classes as well as to work with you on multiple projects, including this one. So, hello, Professor. How are
Hello.
you? How's
Good.
your new chapter in Armenia?
I'm doing well. Armenia is treating me very well. Thank you.
Today we're going to discuss Professor Caron's book Putin's War and the Reopening of History, published in 2023, as well as your new intriguing project on authoritarian and democratic social contracts. So let's begin with the first one. Please let us know more about your book, how you came up with it. And this book, I would say, is something really unconventional in Western academia, so you could even probably face some degree of ostracism following its publication.
Yes, I've had face ostracism after I've published this book. It gave me the rare opportunity to have been cancelled by the Canadian Parliament after I have been invited to testify in front of a standing committee on foreign affairs to talk about the future of Canada's foreign policy. About 2 hours before the beginning of the meeting, another witness, a university professor from another university, when she saw my name on the agenda, on the schedule, she threatened not to testify if I was going to be allowed to testify during that committee. So I got canceled by the chair of the committee 2 hours before the audience. So I basically flew from Astana to Ottawa for nothing, and that was largely due to the ideas that I'm defending in this book. But with all due respect, there's no polemic, I think, in this book. I'm simply describing what I feel has been a shift in Russia's foreign policy since Vladimir Putin came back to power in 2012 after the 4 years, the interlude of 4 years of Dmitry Medvedev from 2008 and 2012. I really feel that from that point, in 2011, there's been a shift in Russia's foreign policy, which became more ideological than it was before. And I think there are reasons for that we can talk a little bit later on in the podcast. But so I think it also highlights the reason of the Kremlin to invade Ukraine. So I think many people have been focusing on the fact that this was doing in the mind of the Kremlin, of Vladimir Putin. The reason is the enlargement of NATO eastward that has created a geostrategic dilemma for Russia, which has led Moscow to invade Ukraine. I think this has been the dominant explanation that had been advocated by many people, just like John Mersheimer, among many others. I think this argument is valuable. It makes sense, but I think there's something that people tend to forget, and it's the opposition that Vladimir Putin has developed, as I've said, since 2011, 2012, between Russia and the Western world. So he is clearly presenting Russia as a shield against what he calls the decadence of the West, of the Western world, that is no longer able, according to him, I'm using his words here. These are not my words. That's maybe which has led to the confusion on the part of many people who believe that these are my beliefs. This is not the case. I'm simply reporting what Vladimir Putin has been saying for the past 15 years. He feels that the Western world is decadent, that the Western world has now become unable to distinguish between good and evil, that they have lost completely their traditional values, and it is the responsibility of Russia as a civilization in itself to protect, to uphold the traditional values of Christianism. And the thing is, this rhetoric didn't came out of the blue. It's actually part of the Russian collective psyche for the past 200 years. It's closely linked to the Slavophil legacy, which started in the 19th century, when you've had many intellectuals in Russia who developed this idea that Moscow is the third and last Rome. It is the ultimate, the absolute shield against all decadent values. And this idea is very important. So Moscow as the third Rome. So the first two Romes have fallen. So Rome, Constantinople in the 1452, and then Rome, and then Moscow, and there won't be a fourth Rome. So the traditional values of Christianity will only survive if Moscow, Russia, is able to uphold them. And this has been part of the Russian collective psyche since the 19th century for the past 200 years. And many authors, some more known than others, have been influenced by this belief, by this thought. So Dostoevsky, to a large extent, can be part of this legacy. Tolstoy as well in his novels, he's somehow presenting the Russian mentality as being different from the one of the rest of Europe. So Vladimir Putin, when he came up with this rhetoric in 2011, 2012, as I said, it didn't came out of nowhere. He took something that was anchored in the history of Russia and its collective psychology. And I think so. The people tend to forget that there is this new opposition that can explain up to a certain point his decision to invade Ukraine, because again, in his mind, with the color revolutions, he felt that the Western world was impeding on Russia's in Russia's backyard, and that if he didn't do anything, then the next step would have basically been an attack against Russia and his power. So I think out of this war in Ukraine, what people tend to forget is that there is a matter of an opposition in terms of ideas and values that is now, I think, pivotal in Russia's foreign policy.
Now it's been more than 2 years since you've published the book, and of course, the idea that enlargement of NATO was one of the biggest reasons, dominant ideas in academia, but also in the beginning of your book, you mentioned that many people simply believe that Putin was just a crazy man. And it's
Yeah.
not only in scholarship, but generally among society, even here in Kazakhstan, many people believe that way. So how do you think has it changed? Did this
Sure.
perception of Putin as crazy man as well as enlargement of NATO the only reasonable explanation? Has it changed?
Well, about NATO's enlargement, I think it's still a reason advocated by many people. I think also many people who are not really, how would I say, who are not only keeping an eye on, about what is going on in a sporadic manner. I think they still believe that Vladimir Putin is crazy. His action was completely irrational. While on the other end, I think this is completely the other way. I believe his actions were entirely rational. He knew exactly what he was doing. And so we can talk later on about the connection with the authoritarian social contract. So I believe that was an enlightened decision on his part. He knew exactly what he was doing because it is serving a specific purpose in his quest to reorganize the relationship between the state and the people. But also, I think by doing that, he also knows that this is going to appeal to many Russians who
Mhm.
are very like globally, I would say, like the Russian people in comparison with the people in Europe are way more conservative when it comes to, like, again, once again, in many of Putin's speeches, especially the annual meetings of the Valdai Discussion Club, if
Mhm.
you read them over the past 10 years, his rhetoric has become always more and more and more explicit and more radical. And probably the main targets in his speeches is the wokeism in the Western world. And he's mentioning it multiple times in his speeches. The simple fact that the Western world, according to him, has not only become unable to make a distinction between good and evil, but he's also saying there people in the West have also become unable to understand, to make the distinction between male and female. And I think in Russia, in the space where we are living, this type of argument is attractive to many, many people in their perception of the Western world, of Western values that they now feel have gone completely whack. It's completely out of hand, and when people are looking at the environment, the space where they are living, they kind of feel maybe a form of a sense that it's reconforting, thinking that their space has not been influenced by these Western values. So I think uh, it is playing a major role in the assessment, the understanding of people, where they stand. And if one day in the 21st century there were to be another wall, another Cold War
Mm.
that could be arising between what many people are calling the liberal world versus the illiberal world, we should not neglect that these sorts of ideas, will play a pivotal role in this what seems to be an upcoming new political divide in the world of international relations.
Well, yeah, 2 years ago in summer, when Secretary Xi Jinping visited Astana to meet here with Vladimir Putin, I remember it was the first time I heard this idea from you that Putin at that meeting was trying to sell a certain idea to Secretary Xi, which was about what you've just mentioned, this multipolar world with
Yeah, it's
China and Russia being the leaders.
Exactly. So it's not, I think for Putin, it's not about simply the fact that the Western world is not upholding the norms that they have come up with at the end of the Cold War. So I think we should not neglect, from a geostrategic point of view, 1999, the attack of NATO against Serbia, the case of the conflict in Kosovo, and 4 years later, the American invasion of Iraq. It has created a shock in China and in Russia. And if you read Vladimir Putin's speech in Munich in February 2007, he's making it clear. How can we be safe in a world where the hegemon is not even upholding the norms it had come up with? How can we be safe when this state, the United States, can just act however it wants, whenever it's going to suit its needs, irrespective of the norms that are in place? So if you are facing such a situation, this hegemon can only be a potential enemy. So we have to rebuild our armed forces, because we don't know, maybe one day we will be attacked by this hegemon. So I think this is playing a role. But for the common people, it's difficult to understand. So I think, in a way, Vladimir Putin, this is why he has developed this idealistic opposition between the Russian world, the Russkiy Mir, and the Western world, because he knows it's going to be appealing for people, and it's going to facilitate his ability to mobilize them for the sake of making various sacrifices, for the sake of defending Mother Russia against this potential invader. And if Russia is getting closer to China, I think it's kind of obvious that China will be the new hegemon, just in terms of population, economic growth. Russia will never be able to become more important than China. So China would lead, economically speaking, militarily speaking, would lead the illiberal world. But I think one aspect where Russia could play a significant role is by driving the idealistic opposition with the Western world. And this has been Putin's goal for the past 15 years. And slowly but surely, you're starting to see gradually the same kind of idealistic opposition appearing in China, once again, as a supplement of the inability of China to find its place in the world of 2025, because the hegemon in place is simply not willing to change these norms to allow this new hegemon to be able to find a place in the world of 2025. So this is a way to mobilize people in order to justify on their part sacrifices that they would otherwise not accept to make. So I think this opposition in terms of value, it's not just a matter of pure rhetoric. It may have significant consequences in the future, not in 50 years, but in the near future, in the development of this new divide between, again, the liberal world and the illiberal world.
So, if your prediction comes true and we would end up living in this bipolar world, what would it imply? Would it be more secure, more predictive? Is cooperation between the blocks possible?
It's hard to say. I mean, during the Cold War, there was basically no economic cooperation between the capitalist world and the communist world. They were living respectively in autarcy. Um, Thing is, in the past 60 years with globalization, so there's been like economic cooperation, and there is still economic cooperation between China and the United States, despite the trade wars. So this is something we're going to have to wait and see if we're going to see something similar in the near future as it was the case during the Cold War. But but in a certain way, the trade war can also trigger this new divide, because it's Lee Kuan Yew, the founding prime minister of Singapore, has always said, uh, don't force us to make a choice between either the United States, the Western world, or China. We don't want to have to make this choice. Don't force us to make a choice. But it also means if you are forcing us to make a choice, well, we're going to side with the country, with the world that has the best chances of allowing us to achieve our own objectives of economic growth and et cetera, et cetera. And the thing is, I mean, I think we can all agree that the future is now towards Asia. And the 21st century will be the century of Asia. This is where you have economic growth. This is where the markets are. This is where the demography is. And also, this is where most of the natural resources, and especially rare earth material, are. So if this economic world comes together, we can expect that Russia will play a role and will add to this new divide, this idealistic opposition. Because in China, in this part of the world, in Asia, people are way more susceptible to adhere to these conservative notions than to side with the liberal values of the Western world. So this can be just add fuel on fire by accelerating the choice that these states may have to make. And in the eyes of their population, this may be the element that will convince them that their statesmen are making the right decision by siding with China and Moscow rather than siding with Brussels and Washington.
Mhm. And this would probably lead us to your new, more recent project on authoritarian social contract, as the 21st century is a potentially century of Asia, while Asia is authoritarian largely. So, what does it have to do with your project?
So first thing, I think when you have a look at democratic values, the democratic legitimacy, since the past 20 years, everywhere in the world, it is in decline. And on the other end, the authoritarianism is on the rise. It's not only something that you see in this part of the world in Asia, but it's also something that we are starting to see in the Western world, especially on the part of the younger generations who feel, for whatever reason, whether it's true or not, it is their perception that from a material perspective, they're not going to have a better life than their parents. So there will be a decline of their material well-being, and because of that, they are opting in favor of authoritarian means of government because they don't believe in they don't believe in democracy anymore. So this is something that we need to realize, we need to cope with, and we should not put our head in the sand, hoping that this reality will simply disappear by magic. It's been there for 20 years, and this trend is simply accelerating. And when you see the rise of populism in the United States, in Europe, well, this is exactly the sign that that democracy, there's an erosion of the democratic social contract, democratic legitimacy. Now, having said that, so when Vladimir Putin first came to power in December 31st, 1999, so let's just say 2000. So from 2000 till 2008, Vladimir Putin implemented a very conventional type of authoritarian social contract. So the cooptation of people was made through the delivery of what I feel are three essential human needs. So safety and security, material well-being, and the protection of people's personal freedom. Not political freedom, but personal freedom. I think this is what he has been able to achieve from 2008 till 2000, from 2000 until 2008. And what has been helping it a lot was the price of oil during that time period that was just right, was simply reaching records. So from that, during these more or less 10 years, the material well-being of the Russian population has dramatically increased for the better. Insecurity that was so typical of the 1990s in Russia under the reign of Boris Yeltsin, it simply disappeared. Putin was able to make sure that the country was safe. Now, this is why this is how he has been able to gain people's trust, confidence, and to appear in their eyes as being a legitimate ruler, despite the fact that they didn't have political freedom. The elections were rigged, the elections were not competitive, but I think for people, if these needs, these basic needs are satisfied, they will be perfectly fine with the fact of not having political freedom. So this is the trade-off people are willing to accept anywhere in the world. I will be willing not to be able to participate in the democratic process, not to have political freedom, insofar as I am safe, my family is safe, and I'm able to enjoy good material living conditions. And if you have a look at safety, for instance, I think currently one of the best example in this regard is El Salvador. Nayib Bukele, for 30 years, El Salvador, I mean, that country has always been historically unsafe. It was a dangerous place. People were fed up with it, and Bukele promised the people to get rid of criminality, which he did. Well, in the process, he also put in prison many people who were innocent, but people now have the perception that they are finally safe. And he has destroyed democracy in the country, but people don't seem to care at all. If you have a look at the recent surveys indicating his support, it's 80% of people in El Salvador who are supporting him, which shows that people will be willing to sacrifice their political freedom for the sake of satisfying some of their more basic needs. Safety is one of them, and enjoying good material living condition is also another one.
Another example would be, sorry, great example I would say is Yugoslavia before Tito's death and before economic decline, following the war until 1980, when people were able to move around Europe to earn money, buy cars, buy clothes in London, and bring music to Sarajevo. So people were happy, safe, secure, and today, people are still nostalgic about that past
Yeah,
across the region in every single post-Yugoslav state.
yeah. Even though people didn't have political freedom, was no
Not at all.
elections,
Yep.
but they were free
But
in their personal life. They were able to
Exactly,
travel
exactly.
everywhere they wanted to go. They were able to have an apartment, to go on vacation, to enjoy good material conditions. I think if this basic need is satisfied, people are not really going to care about the type of political system that will be in place. I think this is a problem with democracy at the moment. The democratic countries, since the crisis of 2008, there's basically no more economic growth, and young
Mhm.
people don't see a future in the current situations, which is why they're turning their back against democracy, and they're looking at what is going on in authoritarian states, and they see economic rates growth of 5-6%, and they're wondering like, why isn't it possible here? Maybe we should have their type of authoritarian capitalism, which is functioning much better than our democratic capitalism. So there is this fascination that young people, younger generation, have regarding authoritarianism. So this is the thing in Russia between 2000 and 2008. Putin has been able to buy people's support by providing them with their basic needs. Problem: if you want to buy people's support by giving them always increasing better material conditions, it costs a lot of money. And you can only do so if you have economic growth. And in the case of Russia, if the price of the oil barrel will be $150. Now, 2008 economic crisis, and ever since, the price of the oil barrel has decreased dramatically. So I think Putin at that point understood, he realized this type of conventional authoritarian social contract wasn't going to be sustainable in the long run, and he had to establish a new type of relationship between the state and the people. And I think at that time, this is what he was trying to establish. What I was discussing earlier with the revival of the Slavophil legacy, the ideas that Russia is fighting some sort of a sacred war against the Western world. Now, the co-optation of people has been replaced by a willingness on his part to mobilize people for the sake of fighting for an ideological objective, which will allow, which should, and this is the objective, which should allow people to accept to make sacrifices because they are mobilized for the sake of defending the superior ideological or political objective. And I think this is why he has come up with this type of anti-West rhetoric and the opposition of Russian values against Western values. He's trying to mobilize the Russian people behind a form of a sacred war. Now the question is it working? And in light of the way Russia has been managing its war in Ukraine for the past 3 years and a half, I don't think it is working. So maybe people are convinced. Maybe the Russian people are convinced that their values are superior to the decadent ones of the Western world. Maybe they're fine with the idea, but not to a point where they would be willing to sacrifice their life on the battlefield in Ukraine, not to a point where they would be willing to eat only 2 meals a day instead of three, and up to the cost of no longer being able to travel abroad because they might have to accept significant pay cuts. Like, for instance, the war in Ukraine, Russia has been entirely relying on volunteers. And why are Russian people volunteering to fight in the armed forces? Simply because they're paid 5, 6, 7 times the average income in their region. This is the only way Russia has found to mobilize people to go and die in Ukraine, because people are not doing it for free. And I think it shows that the Russian people, they're still in the previous type
Mhm.
of a authoritarian social contract. It's, I am willing to make sacrifices to accept a certain trade-off if I get something in return, which may be safety or in this case, being able to enjoy a good material living conditions. I think this is why it's fascinating the current time, because we are witnessing um, uh, the official rhetoric of the Kremlin, which is aiming in a
Mhm.
certain direction, but we tend to see that the Russian people are not following this trend. they are still living in the world of 2000, 2008,
Mhm.
and they're still supporting their regime only because it is expected to provide them with safety and material good material living conditions, while the Kremlin, the authorities are trying to aim in another direction. So I think there is a fascinating clash here when we're having a look at Russian politics. And it's unfortunate because if the only analysis that has the right to prevail in the Western world is simply people are expected to simply repeat that Vladimir Putin is completely crazy. He has lost touch with reality, etc., etc. It is depriving us of the ability to understand this trend and what might be actually the real vulnerability of Russia. Because if there is a growing gap between what the Kremlin is trying to achieve and the hope, the expectations of the Russian people, it is a tremendous political liability for the regime in place. So that's why I'll be publishing this book in 2026 to provide people with a better understanding of what are people's expectations. And these expectations are universal. They're transcending authoritarian regimes or democratic regimes. People basically want the satisfaction of three basic needs. And if these needs are satisfied, they will recognize their state, their government as being legitimate. But when these needs are not satisfied, they will opt for other types of political options.
Well, Professor, thank you very much for your time. Looking forward to reading your book. And personally, when you first shared your initial drafts, I was immediately convinced and wanted to write something similar on Yugoslavia and Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Well,
Unfortunately,
yeah,
don't have enough time to commit to the project now, but I
but
believe it would be great.
yeah, but I mean, this book, it's basically based on my experience of the past decade in
Mhm.
Kazakhstan,
Yeah,
because when
that's
you
why
are
it's so convincing to me. I can understand it pretty well.
exactly when you're discussing with people, people are going to recognize openly, of course, the elections are not competitive as they are in the Western world, but yet I'm fine with this situation. Why is it the case? Because I have a job, all my family members have a job. Just
Yeah.
like me, you can do things in Astana that you would never do in the Western world, like getting in a car with a stranger, someone you don't know. This is something amazingly common in Astana. This is something I would never do in Montreal or even less in the United States, for instance, because I would feel for my safety. So
Yeah.
when you realize that these needs are being satisfied, it makes you realize that the nature of the government really doesn't really matter for the people. And I think this is the secret for the stability of authoritarian regimes. This has been the case in Russia. This has been the case as well in China and
Mhm.
Central Asia. And this has also been the reason why these authoritarian regimes have collapsed in some other places in the world. 2011, 2012, Arab Spring revolutions, simply because these authoritarian social contracts in the region were simply no longer able to deliver the
Mhm.
expected goods.
Yeah, completely agree. Well, thank you very much for your time once again, Professor, and
Welcome.
hope to see you soon
Yeah, soon.
in
Thank
Armenia.
you.
All
Thank
right,
you.
we can
Bye.
stop recording here. Goodbye.